Well, welcome everyone and happy Civic Learning Week. My name's Amy Muirs and I'm the CEO for the National Youth Leadership Council, your host for this event. We're really excited about the great lineup of speakers we have today. So just as a reminder, for your best viewing, I really do suggest you put it in speaker view so that you get the best viewing experience. And again, thank you all for being here. We're really excited to celebrate Civic Learning Week. And let's just dive right into our session today. I am going to hand it off to Adonai, who is our facilitator for today's session.
Hello guys, good morning everyone, and also happy Civic Learning Week. It is so great to see how many passionate minds are in the room gathered here together to explore how service learning can drive civic engagement and create real change. So to introduce myself, my name is Adonai Yindakacho, and I'm a senior from Chaska High School in Minnesota. And I'm a part of NYLC's Youth Advisory Council, where we basically host these type of events and youth leadership summits and etc. to help push the idea of civic engagement and service learning. In general, personally for me, I'm really passionate about educational equity, youth advocacy, and just working in my community to make sure that every young voice is heard in decision-making spaces. So that's a little bit about me. Let's turn it over to our panelists and our amazing guest speakers. And just before we get into our panel, I just want to ask by a show of hands, using the Zoom button where you can kind of raise your hand, how many people here have ever participated in a service learning project that changed the way you see your community? Just to get a show of hands for the Zoom function. Okay, that's a lot of people, you guys. Pretty much everyone has participated in a service learning project. That's great. Good job. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for sharing. That right there is the power of service learning, you guys. It transforms not just communities, but the individuals involved. So today we're going to hear from incredible panelists, as I have said, and these panelists have dedicated themselves to fostering civic responsibility and empowering young people to take action. And I hope that they can give you great insight. So today we have Ace Parsley. So he is a director of coalition and engagement at iCivics. We have Kayla Pilgrim, a trailblazer in civic advocacy who earned her degree at only 18 years old, and Dr. Michelle Herzog, a national leader in civics education. So each of them brings a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities within civic education. And I know today's conversation will leave us all inspired to take action. So as we begin, I encourage you to engage in conversation by dropping your thoughts and questions in the chat. We will not get to them until the 15-minute Q&A session we will have after our panel, but feel free to drop questions in the chat so they can answer them near the end. So let's get started. So first off, I just want to start off with our panel. Why don't you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are? If Ace, you want to start first?
Sure. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you all. My name's Ace Parsley. I'm the Director of Coalition Engagement at iCivics, and so I manage engagement for the now over 370 organizations, part of the National Civics Now Coalition. I come to this work. I am a first-generation immigrant. I immigrated from Iran when I was 8, and I genuinely believe in the importance and the power of education to prepare young people to for a thriving democracy. It's just and I started out my career at the as a classroom teacher in an elementary school in Redwood City, and then I was also policy director with the National Service Learning Partnership, where I first got to know and work with NYLC.
Kayla, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So thank you all for being here. My name is Kayla. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 19 years old and I live in Berwyn, and I'm the oldest of four. And so I recently graduated this December from UIC, and I got my bachelor's in political science. And now currently I'm super excited to be on the Made by Us Youth 250 Bureau, where we advise various organizations and we're able to provide our input and how our communities and our institutions mark the nation's 250th anniversary. And in the past, I've worked pretty extensively in various government, nonprofit, usually focusing on like communication, policy, outreach. And now I'm just hoping to use my experience, my perspective, and just continue to drive civic engagement and really push for a more youth-centered approach to social change.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and I'll go. I'm Michelle Herzog, and first off, I want to thank Amy and NYLC for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm here in Southern California, and a few weeks ago, we had a statewide civic learning summit. So we were grateful that NYLC was in the house. Amy came all the way and was there. So thank you, Amy, for doing that. But no, I started this work, well, a long time ago as a fifth grade teacher. I was an elementary teacher. My life goal was to be a teacher. And we started doing service learning projects with these 10-year-olds. We addressed things like homelessness, environmental issues. I remember getting a CalServe grant right through California, took off from there. And since then, it just really did change the way I taught and saw education. From there, I went to the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and I just left there serving 25 years as the history, social studies, and civics coordinator for all the 83 districts in LA County. It was great, great work. And I've also served as president of National Council for the Social Studies. I was president of California Council for the Social Studies twice. And now, I don't even call it retirement because we're just having too much fun. I'm leading Californians for Civic Learning, which is our statewide coalition, and also the California Civic Learning Initiative out of Teach Democracy, which is used to be Constitutional Rights Foundation. Those two things, and now really we just introduced a bill in California I'll talk about later. But yeah, also pushing for civic education, particularly in our elementary and middle school grades, because we cannot wait till high school. We have to start early. So excited to be part of the conversation today. So thank you again for the invitation.
No problem. Thank you guys so much for introducing yourself and the amazing work you guys are doing in terms of civic engagement. So just to start off this panel, I'm going to ask you, Ace, first. With your work in digital engagement and civic education, we know that civic education is evolving rapidly, especially with the rise of digital tools and media and social media, etc. How do you see service learning complementing civic education to deepen students' understanding and participation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, when I was in college and I got really engaged with Campus Compact, I really started to see service learning as a tool that could save the world. And I think partially is because, and why it's so much more important now than it ever was that people need to be in relationship with each other. I think in an increasingly digital world, it's so easy to get disassociated from place and people. And so I think service learning builds that capacity that, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, and that my learning has a purpose. So I think that as people, particularly now, are experience disconnection, loneliness, and also more distrust of each other, service learning becomes all the more important to build those sort of civic capacities, the knowledge of my community and issues in ways that are relevant, skills like critical thinking and communicating, dispositions of how do I, if I'm in a physical place with somebody and I can interact with people that I disagree with. And I think service learning can be a really powerful tool, an experience for that. And it has always been important, but I think given where we are in the digital age, it's all the more important to engage in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to move on to Kayla and ask you a quick question based off your youth leadership experience. We know that young people today are engaging in civic action a little bit more in different innovative ways, right? So what role does historical context play in shaping how youth understand and approach civic engagement today?
So I love that question. And I think history is so essential for civic engagement and civic innovation, and especially young people. I think we're in a very unique position to access and engage with history because of our access to technology and just the wide range of information that's at our fingertips. And I think when young people learn about history, they become kind of equipped with all of the knowledge and the tools from the past ways of engagement, and that allows them to then shape and fine tune their strategy and the way they participate today, that's building off of the foundation of the failures and successes from our past, and then making their civic engagement today more effective. And I think with that, history kind of becomes a means of empowerment, especially to young people, especially when it comes to civic engagement. I think it can be hard to see the purpose or the significance of like a single civic action. But when we look back at our history and read into that a bit more, I think history helps tie everything all together. And history can kind of offer to young people a sense of continuity and like a real sense of commitment, where you can kind of zoom out and like look at the bigger picture of everything and all the work that came before us. And I think it really helps young people understand like their place in this time, in this generation. And when we look at history, I think it helps us realize the value of our efforts and all the things we do today.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. History does help us know how we can lead at a greater level. So I'm going to move on to Michelle. What I really like about our panels today is that everyone has a completely different perspective that all ties into civic engagement really well. Like we have Ace with digital engagement, Kayla with youth leadership, and now moving on to Michelle with policy and institutional support. So from a policy perspective, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities in expanding service learning as a civic engagement tool within schools?
Well, that's another great question, because policy is where the rubber hits the road. You know, so much around service learning was about ground up organic projects, but often people find that they hit those roadblocks. If they don't have their admin on board, they don't have their school board policies on board, it becomes a real challenge and can be a real frustration. I'm speaking from experience too. So that's a definite challenge. And so there's other challenges too. You know, sound like the old lady saying, "Oh, I've been doing this for a long time." But I know even 20, 30 years ago when we were advocating for this kind of work, it was now more than ever. Now more than ever is the need that's out there to create that empathy in young people and get them engaged and empowered to do things. And I feel like every year we've been saying that more louder and louder, now more than ever. Um, and you know, we're seeing, I know we're not going to go partisan in this presentation, but we're seeing a lot of changes right before our eyes, right, in lifetime, and starting to feel like there may be more need out there. And that hopefully we can use that to energize schools and young people across the board to get more involved. So challenges, other challenges though, we have seen increasingly more and more sensitivity about implementing civics in classrooms. There's a sense that the goal is that teachers are indoctrinating students with their political views. We're hearing that. Teachers and schools are getting very nervous and sensitive to that and starting to pull away from these, these types of activities. That's a terrible challenge. A teacher doesn't want to be in that position, doesn't, you know. So we always, when the opportunity though, is whenever I've conducted training or worked with teachers, is to be very um, um, clear with them to keep all their activities and work and their own views out of the classroom. Be very nonpartisan, be very neutral, and not to open yourself up to that potential criticism, because that can shut a program down in a second. So training is super important. Framing these things in ways where you're presenting different ideas and perspectives and letting kids come up with their decisions and their viewpoints and their actions. So there's opportunities, but we need professional development, good professional development, and open-minded folks to do that kind of thing.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you for sharing. I just
um,
want to like follow up. I know you introduced that you're like working on a current bill right now in the California government. Can you like tell us a little bit more about that and maybe what challenges you're currently facing?
Oh, I'd love to talk to you about
Yes.
that. So our coalition introduced a bill last year that almost got to the finish line, but we've just had it reintroduced. So in California, we have a California State Seal of Civic Engagement. It's optional. It's something high school kids can apply for and a fix on their diploma or their transcript if they meet certain criteria. It's been very popular, not as popular as it should be. It's optional, but it's an incentive. Now in California, though, and in that original legislation, there was a recommendation to create pathways in elementary and middle schools to get kind of kids' feet wet so that when they got to high school, they could meet that criteria and get that seal. Because in California, yes, kids get history, early American history in elementary school. They get the what, but they don't get the engagement. They don't engage with it's pretty much content learning. The seal, one of the criteria for the seal is for kids to engage in a civic action project. And because in California, government and civics is not taught until 12th grade, one semester, it's too little too late. So our bill, Senate Bill 584, by the way, is about establishing those elementary and middle school pathways. We want elementary kids and middle school kids to engage with a government institution about an issue that they're concerned about. And it's not a big lift. It could be, you meet with your mayor or your school board, or you have a judge come into your classroom with our Chief Justice. We also are calling for funding. So the challenge, okay, so the rest of the bill, we have what's called California Serves grants. These are service learning grants for high schools that allow them to develop programs to help kids earn the seal. But that money can only be used for high school. Our bill will say, amend that and let them use the funds for elementary and middle school as well. So that's the push. Get this in elementary and middle schools to set the path to make it go. So if anyone's interested in a letter of support, I'll put something in the chat. Now we've got some challenges with this, and the reason a similar bill was killed last year was because the state legislature keeps asking, how much does this cost? How much does this cost? How much does this cost? What's the funding obligation? And we said repeatedly, you don't need extra money for this. This is just a different pedagogical approach. It's not an add-on curriculum. You can easily do it. We had trouble convincing, and I think in the end, that's why it failed. So we're hopeful. We just had it introduced. We're moving it forward. So Senate Bill 584. Does
Perfect.
that
Thank you.
answer your question? We're very
Yes,
excited.
that answers my question perfectly. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. We actually have some comments and questions in the chat. We'll probably get to the end in relation to your bill. So perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on to Ace. One more question for you. So civics, as we know, has engaged millions and millions of students across the United States through digital civic learning experiences, right?
Mhm.
How can we ensure that these digital tools translate to real world civic action and advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the challenges in a modern context is that we sometimes conflate just posting something with social media on social media as the end of action. Like, I've done my responsibility, I'm done. And I think the challenge in that is that often social media and the algorithms designed in it are designed to create like these sorts of echo chambers. So they don't like necessarily also even give you that opportunity to engage with people who might differ. So I think that the aspect of that and knowing, thinking about digital citizenship as as a modern sort of citizenship responsibility and capacities and teaching those and doing that in a service learning context, I think provides that opportunity to say, this is my experience and use social media to amplify it and to get more people engaged in that conversation. But it's to me, at least anyway, it should always start with that sort of experience. And then if you incorporate like a high quality service learning practice, you should always also incorporate obviously like reflection at the end of that process. And that reflection can be part of that reflection on the social media aspect of it and the digital citizenship aspect can also be incorporated into that. So I think that it is, I just turned 43 last week. So I came about right at the end of my own high school education where the internet was just becoming a thing. So I'm old. But 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 I think that like as I think about those experiences that I had, that those service learning experiences that I had when I was a young person, um, I just think about like, well, now what would that mean to layer this digital citizenship angle on it? Well, like if in that context I engage with young people, I engage with my peers. How does that engagement may have happened just in physical spaces. Now it happens in digital spaces. So what are the implications for that? Um, Now I've done this experience, and part of why I wanted to, at different points, do the experience to begin with is to raise awareness. So I did a capstone a requirement when I was in Pennsylvania, when I was a high school student, raising awareness on different sorts of funded initiative like Boys and Girls Clubs. Part of my goal at that time was to raise awareness on what Boys and Girls Clubs do in my community. Now I get like if I were to do that today, I would do that through largely also amplifying that work on social media. So finding ways also at that point to like respect different people's perspectives, know that some people don't want to be, have their identities amplified and being a responsible digital citizen in that context. So all that sort of reflection and engagement that are really hallmarks of service learning now have to be applied with responsible digital citizenship. So and I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's the way that I would make the connection.
Yes, that like completely answers my question. I like how you said in the beginning, like sometimes, like especially I see in my generation, like people think like posting or reposting something on their story is like their version of civic action or civic advocacy, which it can be in a small way, but I do believe that
Mhm.
having these projects alongside
Yeah.
like using digital civic engagement is very important. So you answered my question perfectly. Moving on to Kayla. Second question for you, Made by Us is focused on connecting young people to history and inspiring them to go towards action. So what lessons from history can help today's youth become stronger civic leaders?
That is a great question. And Made by Us isn't the only organization kind of having this as their focus. And I think it's so important. And a lot of other organizations are doing similar work because our past, like I mentioned, it holds so much wisdom and insight. And even today, like we still have so much to learn from our history. And so I think for young people, one important lesson that we can take from history and historical context is the kind of role that alliances and community plays in our advocacy and in our civic participation, and kind of how to develop coalition building as like a skill, which I think is super essential as a leader. And I think it can help like expand your impact and your success. And I think kind of like now is the time to start leaning on one another and building that community. And history shows us that like there's power in numbers. And when we can come together for a cause, like that works. And so I think that's a super important lesson that young civic leaders can pull from. And I think another lesson from history that is pretty important is the significance of storytelling and like sharing out loud your experiences, your perspective, the work you're doing, and kind of being loud and proud about that. And I call this a lesson because when we look back in history, we see like entire movements and communities being preserved by the stories and the narratives that are like shared and passed down from generation to generation. um, and again, I think young people are uniquely placed because of our access to technology and kind of that digital archive where when we share our story, it's kind of saved in that way. And history has taught us that when stories aren't shared or documented, that entire chapters of like our collective experience can be forgotten or misrepresented or misunderstood. And that is something we do not want to happen. We want to make sure that we preserve our perspective and we preserve the things that we're doing today. Um, and so I think that young civic leaders who recognize their role as like a change maker, of course, and like doing all of this amazing work, should also recognize their role as like the tellers of our story and their story. And I think that young civic leaders should realize and ensure that today's actions are able to become tomorrow's lessons, and that the future generations can look back on the stuff we did and our stories and learn from us and be inspired by us as well, the same way we look back at the stories in history and are inspired by them.
That's very powerful. I like that. Today's action can become tomorrow's lessons. That's very beautiful. Like understanding we're part of history too. So thank you so much for sharing. I also want to ask you.
Can I add just something to that with
Yes,
that? I
yes.
mean, I want to highlight the historical roots and the power of young people's engagement. So, uh, this coming Sunday, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, Sunday, was the 70th, and so we all know about Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat on, in Montgomery. And we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of that. But I want to highlight, one that anniversary that we celebrate less, but is in my mind equally important. And that is that on March 2nd, 70 years ago, so less than 2 weeks ago, we had the 70th anniversary of this. Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat on the bus. And Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old in Montgomery, Alabama, and she was part of a youth group that Rosa Parks had led, and she refused to give up her seat, and that actually was the first thing that really initiated the famous Montgomery movement. So we don't have to look to adults in terms of the historical changes. I think that major historical change is always ushered by young people. And Claudette Colvin is still alive today, by the way. Like she's still alive. There's 2025 is also going to be the 60th anniversary of the famous Selma to Montgomery March. In that march, Linda Blackman Lowry, who was 15 at the time, was one of the marchers. She's still alive. So like we can both look at our forebears and the incredible sacrifices and the important decisions that they made when they were the age of people that are sitting in our classrooms today. And that those conversations, those actions, in some ways were because each of those things then translated into reflection, and when every sort of these movements incorporated that. Those are forms I would argue, and some the service learning field might disagree with me. Those are forms of service learning in ways. And so I want to just be able to like as we're thinking about that history, honor that history to make that connection to the fact that these were young people, the ages of people that are in our classrooms today, and to similarly invest and inspire our young people to do more.
I'll jump in for a minute. I couldn't agree more. I think obviously having a history degree, Kayla, everything you said is right on. The challenge, unfortunately, as you know, is that much of the social studies is marginalized in too many schools in too many states. We know civics is marginalized, history is too. I mean, even in California, there's no accountability, there's no state test for history. A lot of states have dropped that in favor of other things. So that's why we have to leverage other initiatives and other priorities to make sure the social studies get in those classrooms. Everyone agrees, and we've seen this since No Child Left Behind, right? And there's all kinds of data to support this. So when you emphasize how it improves literacy, how it improves critical thinking, those are high priorities for districts, and that we hope helps get those history lessons that you're referencing into classrooms and in students' minds to reference. I'm glad you brought it up, Kayla.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that discussion. I definitely agree with both of you guys. Yeah, like even the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that's almost like you could classify it as like a civics learning project in a sense, and they fought on the front lines. So thank you guys for making those connections to today's history lessons and in the past, and how youth have actually been in the front lines fighting and how we can be inspired by them. So thank you guys for saying that and telling us about that. Moving on to Michelle, one last question for you. How can educators and administrators better advocate for institutional support and funding for service learning programs in their community? I know we have a lot of people from different areas today, but how can these educators and administrators advocate for institutional support and funding? for service
Yeah,
learning programs?
That's a really key question. In fact, I just spoke with some others at our recent California Council for Social Studies conference this past weekend on how to advocate for civic learning. And if I could show a few slides from that presentation, might be useful. I don't know. One thing we do when we talk about that is, first of all, cite the research, cite what research is out there. And so we cited, and you can get a lot of this from the Civics Now website, right? So that's where we rely on to get a lot of that info. We referenced this. This was a study in 2023, talked about some of the, protecting and improving democracy was high on the list as a top priority of people. Schools failing to teach civics. This is data. This is all good data, right? We talked about this data. This was the sample. Most do not think our democracy in the US is working as well as it should, but they're more positive about democracy on the state and local level. Okay. Now, this is 2023 data, even before all the changes we're seeing now. We also talked about what's happening at the federal level. We reference bills that are being watched by Civics Now, just keeping people aware. We shared the state policy menu that just came out from Civics Now with policy recommendations. But here's another thing. So then we went to the state level. So what's going on at your state that you can leverage? What do your standards say? What do your frameworks say? Do you have a mission statement at your school that references citizenship, or I want kids to grow up to be good citizens? That's a wedge in. Can you get it into your school's budget somehow to dedicate funds for things? We cite all kinds of research around that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we want to leverage existing initiatives that you can show. We all have all kinds of research and data that shows that's good, high quality civic learning, civic engagement, service learning affects all of these things. Academic achievement, school climate, social emotional learning, attendance rates, graduation rates, right? These are wonderful things to point out to school superintendents, to school board members. They're all over this, right? So we say, show them this research, right? If you want kids to be a successful, achieving, socially and emotionally adept, this is the way to do it, because you're making the learning interesting and relevant to them. So that's what we suggest to schools, because if you just present it as, hey, I got a great idea, and it's seen as an add-on, you're going to get resistance. We don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have room for that in the schedule. But talk to them, say, what are your priorities? Here's how we can help you achieve those goals.
I like that different type of framing. I've definitely heard that before, like, oh, it's just an addition that we don't need. It's an extra thing that you're presenting, but the way you frame it obviously matters. I know we have someone in the chat that said, if there's any way these slides will be shared, if you could put them in the chat, that'd be great. If not, I'm sure we can work with Amy to be able to send them out to the participants.
Oh, my slides? Okay,
Yes.
I think I have it in a Google Drive somewhere. I can put the link in the chat. Keep in mind, though, it was for a California audience, so it's a little California oriented. But if you get anything from it, good luck. I hope it helps.
The world is pretty California oriented, so.
Well, I don't know lately. I don't know. We're getting the brunt of a lot of stuff.
But
who
I'll
isn't?
just like ping in on that too. I think Michelle, you're part of the Teachers Advancing Civic Learning Initiative, aren't you? Are you in that? Maybe you're part of 10,000 different things. So I know NYLC is a member of that. So we have a project called Teachers Advancing Civic Learning, which we call Tackle. I put a link into the chat about it. If you have teachers who want to be able to share their story with different decision makers, I encourage you to engage in that project. So I included the link to Tackle and then also a social media post that we just put out this last week to engage other teachers in it.
Thank you guys so much for giving these resources. I'm sure everyone will benefit from it. Thank you guys so much. Just going back to you, Ace, actually, just for one last question. What strategies, it's kind of similar to the one I asked Michelle, but what strategies can educators use to integrate civic engagement into the curriculum in a way that's accessible and inclusive for all students? I know you gave some resources, but any suggestions?
So I think that I am a big fan of the social studies. I like everything in the socials, but I think that if the civic mission of what learning happens, our mission to democracy just resides in that, then we will not succeed in our overall mission. So I actually didn't have great social studies education when I was in school. But I did like learn about some of these concepts through my English class of reading 1984 and discussing those areas. So these are the National Council for Teachers of English as well as the National Council for Social Studies are members of our coalition. There's a lot happening right now in great science education where we know service learning initiatives like efforts like Earth Force and others that go in and like, for example, assess the quality and the health of your local watershed or rivers and incorporate that into your science project. So I think one of the things that makes service learning incredibly powerful is that it can bring that sort of great civic learning experiences across to all subjects, and engage with that. So I would say first thing to do is to look at that sort of content and what it is that young people really care about in your classroom context, and then think about, well, how can I make that into a project and engage young people in something that's very relevant to them, in that. So, if you are part of being civic is like, I think we sometimes so often conflate this with civic with voting, and voting is certainly part of it, but there's all sorts of different ways that we can be civic. And that could be attending community meetings, attending your local either school board meetings or city council meetings, being part of that, being part of service projects. All those things can themselves be learning. So think about where your discipline intersects with that and engage service learning as a clear strategy to make whatever that is, that standard, that discipline, into something that's civic.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to move on to Kayla for one last question, and then we'll probably hop into the Q&A. So if you guys want to think of any questions that you have for our amazing panelists today and any information you want to get, we're probably going to start a Q&A right after this question. So just a little heads up. So Kayla, one last question for you. What advice do you have for organizations looking to authentically engage youth in service learning initiatives that lead to a lasting impact?
Okay. So I think there's a lot. I'm going to start with what not to do. So I think for organizations who have that as their goal, one of the biggest mistakes that I see, like as a young person engaging in these spaces, is that they treat young people like the consumers of their initiative or their event rather than thinking of like it as a relationship and seeing young people as like the co-creators of the service learning initiatives that they have planned. And so then my advice is to, if you haven't already, let young people be the leaders in these spaces. And something that I think is super important is to have young people lead before you think they're ready or before they fit your criteria, is have young people in the room, give their feedback, give their insights. Just because they are young people and they have the youth perspective, I think that is helpful enough. And I think that from what I've seen, when we give young people that like real decision-making power and not like just like tasks or like a symbolic role, I think that when we give them that real decision-making power, like they really step up in like some pretty remarkable ways. And they have such unique perspectives, and young people like they ask the tough questions and they notice things that like, oh, you maybe skipped over, or they bring ideas that like you haven't thought of before. And I say this is a really important thing. I'm leading with this because young people can notice and they can tell when their involvement is just like for show, or when you're just kind of using them instead of having them be in those decision-making spaces, and they will check out the moment they come to that realization and they feel like they're being used as like a token. And so make sure that you have young people like in the creation and development stage before you even start to market it to young people. And I'm going to quickly plug the Made by Us Youth 250 Bureau. If you'd like support in that area and you're interested in getting matched with youth advisors, please go to the link. But I think overall, the advice, like the biggest advice I have, and this is connected to my first point, is that you should focus on building agency in the young people in your community and making sure you're building like a long-term relationship. If you're only engaging young people for like your youth event or can you give feedback on this youth-centered initiative, that's not going to make young people stick. And you need to have constant opportunities for young people. So like an advisory board, a program, or just like the regular space where young people can come and they feel safe and welcome. Um, I think when you're able, like as an organization, to establish yourself as an inclusive and inviting space for young people, even if young people aren't your focus or your main audience, that young people will end up coming back for future events and for your future initiatives. And if they begin to really like trust the space that you create, then they'll bring like their friend or two, and then your youth engagement can double and triple naturally and on its own because of the culture that you already established in your organization, being inclusive and having young people be the decision makers for your initiatives. And then another thing that I think is like you should take along with this is that consistency is key here, and showing young people that like you care about their voice and their input and their presence and making that known to young people, then it kind of creates like a powerful cycle of youth engagement that can extend beyond any single service learning initiative. And I think that's what organizations are looking for.
Yes, thank you so much. I definitely agree with everything that you said, like 100 million times. I think that's really accurate for youth. Like, we do not want to be tokenized or feel tokenized in that sense, but we want to actually build long-lasting relationships and feel like we're actually being a part of that change, and for people to take us seriously, because as soon as we get younger, people are like, oh, they don't have the brain capacities to do it, and etc. So thank you so much for saying that. Everything you said was 1,000,000% correct, and I definitely agree with it. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. You guys can raise your hands and speak if you would like. If you want to just put it in the chat and I can shout them out, feel free to do so. We'll give you guys a few seconds to think of some questions and raise your hand if you want to speak. Okay, I think we have one question in the chat for Michelle, a little bit further in chat, and it was when you were explaining the bill that you had. It said, will the California Senate bill initiate an update or a rewrite of the social studies standards and framework?
So I can address that. That was a question I asked, and I am from California, and it's the ever
Oh, yeah.
asked question: when are we going to see? We have the new framework from 2016. Your bill is focused on, I assume, the language that was in the framework from 2017, and it's from what I understand, it's being focused on 7th and 8th grade or on pre-high school. But are we going to see anything going on with our standards or framework? And I think what you answered in chat was no, that it's an act of legislation that's.
Yeah, I wish I could be more optimistic about that. We've been fighting that for 20, 30 years, because we're overdue for an update. We fought hard. Well, I think we have the oldest standards in the state, like nothing's ever happened since 1998. Don't we have a need for
Yeah.
something, right? It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. We have been fighting for that for some time, but what happens is it's very controversial every time the topic comes up, right? They don't want to open Pandora's box. That's not an official reason, it's just my observation. There was and I served on the Instructional Quality Committee in California too. And so there was an effort saying, well, listen, maybe if we update the framework, that should be easy, and then we'll slide the standards in later. I don't know if I think all states have frameworks. They're basically the teacher's guide that goes with the standards, kind of the how-to. Well, when they started to update that framework, they had thousands and thousands of comments and public comment. There was a lot of debate. Every special interest group came out of the woodwork, wanting this added, wanting that added. Lines formed around the building in Sacramento. The civics people, we were there in line too. We wanted to see more emphasis on civic education and civic learning in there, which we succeeded. But after that experience, I think they're even less likely to open up the standards discussion. I wish, because we're outdated. We get that question a lot. And then it also follows, how do you update textbooks too, right? So it becomes a cascade effect. And in California, as you know, Ryan, they dropped the statewide test for anything to do with social studies.
Yeah.
It's not on our California dashboard. Schools are not held accountable at all. So, the old adage, what gets tested gets taught, sadly. So this is the struggle I know you're seeing in Stockton, and you guys are doing great work there too. So
Well, it's one of my biggest pushes is showing how social studies can help us be accountable within ELA, within our
Exactly.
alternative curriculums, how our ethnic studies classes and our social studies classes really drive and push these same skills and the same learning opportunities that are going to be tested. And then this dashboard issue, I just keep hoping that we establish the state seal to be on the dashboard, similar to how they did it with the state seal of biliteracy. I mean,
Yes,
that will be
they're
huge.
they're working toward that. I think they're very close to that. The dashboard, for all the rest of you, it's just sort of your report card for your district, and different things are weighted. You get points for different things. So of course everyone wants the highest points. And the state board even recommended that you should get bonus points if you have kids earning the state seal. So there's been a push for that. But that's why we're having such a hard time in California. Believe it or not, you know. We're not what you think we are out here. We're a real mixture out here, right? Right, Ryan?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions? I do see some questions in the chat that I can reply to. So, Amy has asked, anyone can answer this, so feel free to blurt out first if you want to answer this first, panelists. So, in an era of declining trust in institutions, what steps can civic leaders take to build credibility and strengthen public confidence?
Oh, that's a good one. You mean civic leaders like mayors, local city councils, and those folks? Or civic education leaders?
I meant civic education leaders.
Yeah, okay. This is why I keep emphasizing now, we have to be hypersensitive and hyper careful on how this work is delivered and how we engage young people in the work. Every single word is a lightning rod now, right? We came across, if people use the word action civics, that became a lightning rod because it was perceived as you can imagine. Okay, I won't even go there. So yes, and I agreed with everything that Kayla said about giving youth voice and putting them in front. But I think it takes some guidance too, and being very cautious and careful in how we facilitate that. We don't want to shut down youth voice, but I think it needs to be facilitated carefully because kids will come up with all kinds of things, right? And if you sense that something, an idea comes forward that can just blow up, now you've lost everything. So I think being hyper careful and critical of the language, the approaches. We talk about if you're getting to the phase of taking informed action, think about the actions that you're thinking about. Will the action be effective? Will it be responsible? And will it not get you fired? That's what I'm always saying. You know, kids will want to do school walkouts. Is that an effective approach to solving a problem? Is it responsible? You need to ask these questions and I think have those conversations because the last thing you want to do is get shut down by somebody because what they're perceiving is not appropriate in some way. I hate to sound like that, but I think that's the reality we're living in.
I would push back on that. I mean, not all parts of that, but I think that, you know, in a modern sort of context, like you're it's gonna be hard to satisfy everybody all the time. So no matter what you do, you're gonna have those sorts of challenges. I know, like, as an organization initiative, sometimes we've gotten attacked for youth voice, like emphasizing and elevating youth voice. Well, like, people are going to attack that, but that's a core value of who we are. And
I
so I think
agree.
at some points, like, you have to just realize and say, like, okay, who am I? Who do I want to be in this? And then, then you get into sort of like in a modern context where everything feels public, then you're going to get into some hot water with somebody. I think it's unavoidable, but just get into the areas that you want to get into because they are reflections of who you are and who you want to be. And then the other things that I would say is one, show, don't tell. And I think that that's something that uh, service learning is really excellently geared towards. Um, I think we get into these sorts of culture war conversations because we get into like terminology, this and but where you're actually engaging in that service, I think your actions speak louder than your words, and your actions communicate something deeper about what it is that you're learning. And then I think that the other aspect of this is be very clear in your execution that you're welcoming viewpoint diversity. I 8 years ago I lived in Washington, D.C. when we had our daughter, bluest electoral area of the country by just electoral like votes. And then I moved to West Virginia. I live in West Virginia. My daughter's a third grader in a West Virginia elementary school, reddest state in the country. And in neither of those would I want anybody, a teacher or anybody, to indoctrinate to my daughter right, left, or center. I would like to have my daughter be able to think and know what she believes and be able to assess like the credibility of sources and all the things of why she believes what she, and that I think that that's what great teaching and teachers and teaching enable, is to say, like, and to open people up to the counter viewpoint and show that we can, like, even if you might even invite, like, you don't have to really necessarily agree with it, but what would the counterpoint be to that area? The more you can facilitate that sort of environment where that is expected. I don't think that we've done surveys of parents and educators, and parents, educators, and the broader public at large are actually um, therefore going at, like, even issues that they might disagree with, as long as they feel like it's authentic, that you're opening up that space and you don't have an agenda. I think people are actually pretty open to that. Now there's just louder voices that may yell, but we have polling data that we did a poll with a reputable Republican pollster, and we at the time, because there was a lot of that pushback was coming back from the more conservative side of the spectrum, we over polled parents and Republican primary voters. And actually, like, the support is pretty universal. Like, do we think that it's more important to teach this subjects than it was 5 years ago? Overwhelmingly, yes. Do
Mhm.
we think that we should teach things about race or even the Civil War, all these things that we think? Overwhelmingly supportive of it. So I don't think it's the topic or the content. I think for anybody who's been a parent, um, it's an incredible act of trust to send the person that you love the most into essentially a building of strangers. And so part of the challenge is that that trust has been uh often by nefarious actors been shaken. And so, like, I think the more that we can do to show rather than tell, and to make this sort of viewpoint diversity a core dimension of what we do, the better off we'll be.
I agree with you, Ace, wholeheartedly. The Civic Education Center in Fresno does a fabulous job of working with youth and they have youth working with their school administrators collectively to identify issues, finding ways to address them. And we have now a statewide youth network that they run that does exactly that. It's students lead, but with guidance, somewhat with admins and whatever too, because then that protects them as well. No.
Perfect. Thank you guys for sharing. Any questions? Anyone else want to raise their hand and speak on a question? Otherwise, there's some questions in the chat that I can go over. Perfect. Julie has asked a question. It says, any other tips or tricks to promote civic engagement that reaffirms that is not indoctrinate? Sorry, let me repeat what I said. Any other tips and tricks to promote civic engagement that reaffirms that is not indoctrination? Why can't I say that word?
I'll put I'm sorry, I've been talking, so I'll say I don't know, Kayla, Michelle, if you guys have anything. I have some here there, but I also, like, I know I've been taking up a little bit too much more of the oxygen on this. So I don't know if Kayla and Michelle want to start, and then I'm happy
Well, I
to.
just reiterate, really emphasize with educators to try very hard to be as nonpartisan and neutral in your talk as you can, because then you become a target for some of that. You don't know what kids come home with and where people lie and different things. That's my best recommendation on that. And then have kids maybe survey if they, survey the parents, the community, kind of let them find out what's more doable, what's realistic, where they can move forward. But you don't want to send them out doing a project that they're gonna, get all this backlash to. There may be some, but you want to minimize that, right? So working collaboratively with doing surveys, surveying other kids, collecting their own data, so they have something to back up what they're wanting to do. It's hard to imagine that anyone would argue against kids doing great service in their communities, right? But I don't know. I guess I'm just getting more nervous these days with sort of the atmosphere with an environment that we're living in. I want to protect kids. I want them to be safe. I want them to feel good about what they're doing. So as much as I could do to, create that environment for them, the better.
I really agree with what you said, Michelle, about like just being careful, I think is really important. And like, civic leaders don't want to sacrifice the good work and the minds of young people. But I do think it's important to kind of have both and just make sure you're hyper vigilant of language usage and kind of remembering that the things you put out are going to be seen by, other people and by the community. So I think from my experience, like an easier way to reaffirm instead of indoctrinate is to give young people like things to do or opportunities to kind of have their own thing. Um, and when I was in college, this was something that like my student organization did. I was a part of the Student Advocacy Coalition. And essentially our mission was to encourage civic engagement in students and give them opportunities to be civic participants. And I think that in college there was a lot of young people didn't want to engage with politics and civics, and there were some really good reasons and for that, and the reason why they didn't want to they just wanted to check out because of all the things that were going on in the world. But I do think our method that I saw to be successful in terms of promoting civic engagement was to kind of give them that little push, like sign up for this opportunity, or we have this event, talk to this legislator, and then you can kind of see like their eyes light up, and then them like put two and two together and realize like this is the reason why people are civically engaged, and this is the purpose of civic participation. And so I think a good way to kind of get people, or especially young people, to kind of get there and realize that is to kind of have them go through the motions themselves and have an action that they participate in. And then I think most likely they'll kind of come to that conclusion on their own. And I think that's a pretty effective way of promoting civic engagement without directly educating or directly giving your own perspective, which you have to be a little careful about. I think giving them that action and then having them realize that themselves, I've seen to be pretty successful.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that. I would say that uh make that, so to reiterate my previous point on this, I think make that viewpoint diversity and diversity in all its what forms a feature rather than the bug of your effort. So, high quality service learning includes the dimension of youth voice, it includes partnerships, it includes reflection. All those things you can scaffold that sort of assessment of, well, we did the service. How might somebody that disagrees with this cause, how might they relate to it? Like in the design of it, in our reflection, and in your partnerships, like you have a diverse possibilities for partnerships in your community. So you can work with the food bank, and you can also work with a VFW. So providing that sort of diversity so that any reasonable person can look at it and say like, oh, this is not there's nothing here that's indoctrination. This is just like high quality, powerful learning. So I would say that's a part of it. I'm also going to put into the chat um we have a sister coalition, the Listen First coalition. It's about reducing toxic polarization. And they have an event, and we always sort of like try to connect these two things together. So National Civic Learning Week here this week, and late in April is the National Week of Conversation. You can find information about that at conversation.us. And so one of the things that we want to do is like highlight the many examples of educators that are doing this sort of practice. So if you know of an educator that is explicitly making that part of their goal of how we bridge divides and showing that rather than just saying it, um, have them, put like literally 2 paragraphs in this competition thing that we have here and we'll do a random drawing to get their school like pizza for their staffs, books for their library. Um, so we want to just gather as many of these sorts of stories, and I think these stories happen in the service learning context as well. So I would really encourage, if you know of an educator that's doing this sort of work, to engage in it. And then on that one pager, you'll also find resources around bridging divides. That from some of the really high quality providers in the country. Our organization being one of them as iCivics, but also Generation Citizen, All Sides, Essential Partners, and a number of others as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know Julie had one more question, kind of a follow-up to that question. That also says, is service learning a lightning rod phrase too?
I'll just say I've had I've had quite a career within the service. So when I started out my my work when I was at the National Service Learning Partnership, I do remember going to conferences and sessions where literally people would be at each other's throats about whether we should include the dash between service and learning, and to my friends and colleagues who are like, that's a really important. I don't mean to besmirch it. It's just not where I'm at. Like I think that like sometimes we let the terminology uh dictate what we do and what we don't do. That's to me, that's the tail wagging the dog. So there's some things that we want, like we're part of a field that supports service learning, but I don't think to ever allow again like the terminology to dictate the attacks. And that gets to me about like really about show don't tell. Um, so is everything in this modern context, like depending on who you are, they can try to weaponize it. And so you can either get into that, like into the mud and fight it out with them, but the people that are wanting you to get into the mud actually really like it. So show don't tell. in that context. So are there people that are attacking service learning? Absolutely. Do I think that they are either misinformed or even at times just being malicious? Yes, I do think that they are. But I think we counter that by showing what high quality service learning is, and that high quality service learning incorporates really deep projects of depth and breadth. It connects to real standards and of learning that we're trying to advance, and incorporates that element of reflection, and we can incorporate really high quality practice across those dimensions. And so that's what I would encourage.
Yeah, I don't know if that term, just to answer your question, is much of a lightning rod, but again, like Ace said, I would reference some of the research. There was research done years ago. Amy, do you remember Andy Furco? I think he's still involved in work. He had a lot of great findings about how it impacted academic achievement and literacy. I would draw on some of that to build a case.
Yeah, Andy has excellent research that supports service learning and continues to drive the global service learning research agenda, which there will be a gathering, I believe, in Atlanta coming up in just a few weeks or later this spring. So definitely an excellent resource. And you can find his presentation in our resource library that takes a deep dive into the service learning research and how it hits on all of the effective elements of pedagogy. So thanks for calling that out, Michelle.
Yeah, I haven't thought about him in a long time.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone have any more questions? If not, I will actually leave it to the panelists to give us some closing remarks. So Ace, if you want to start first.
I
Any-
actually, I had a question for you, Adonai. Like,
Mhm.
you've heard this whole conversation, and you've done just such an excellent job moderating this. But I would also, I would put the question back to you of what do you think in this time that we're in, and what you've experienced in service learning. What would you be your advice to the field and to our to educators and others? I hope it's okay to put you on the spot on that sort
That's
of
okay.
question. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts. Personally, I'm part of my high school's Chaska High School, so we're kind of like rural in a sense. It's really outside the Twin Cities, so we're kind of in the
Uh-huh.
suburb area. And something I'm advocating for right now is ethnic studies. And I do service learning projects, and I advocate for service learning in schools. But I believe that we were talking about history with Kayla actually telling us about how history is so important in order for us to be able to act in our community, to see how we can. I think first we have to learn about history and see how, student nonviolent coordinating committee, how students advocated for civic issues. And so something I'm like fighting for right now is ethnic studies. And there is a bill that was passed in Minnesota that actually required ethnic studies K through 12, which is really great. But I just testified a few weeks ago on a bill presented by Republicans that was trying to take down ethnic studies, saying that it was kind of like the same thing with service learning, in addition, that we don't really need right now, and we need students to focus on reading, math, science. And I went to testify saying that I believe that this is something really essential, right? Students come to school because they want to learn about, like, obviously they want to learn about math, reading, science, etc. But the truth is, if students don't feel represented in their learning, why should they come? I kind of made the argument that ethnic studies like causes increased attendance because students actually feel like they're coming to school to learn about things that are important to them and to do things that are important to them. So I believe that service learning is so important to be incorporated in schools because it allows us to step out into our community and be like, how can I use what I learned in class to go and impact the world, right? Because youth have so much power, and if we don't instill the fact that, hey, you have power and you can do amazing things, right, we're going to be so held back. So that's kind of my thoughts. A lot of thoughts, but thank you for asking me, Ace. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, perfect.
So-
You go. Yes.
So, many of you know, California passed a law requiring ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement. Recently, though, it is no longer required because of funding was not available. But It has become a very controversial and very interesting ride. So I think a lot of folks have learned a lot about it, and I'd be happy to talk with you later at another time to help you maybe avoid some of the pitfalls and things that have been learned from it.
That'd be great. That'd be
It
great.
has
Thank
great
you.
benefits, but there's some other, it's another one you want to go at very carefully.
Mhm. Yes. Thank you guys so much. You guys are such incredible panelists. I learned so much from you just sitting here and asking questions. And I'm sure a bunch of the audience members did as well. So just to have some closing remarks, like what are some final thoughts you want to leave with our audience members? Anything that you want to tell them or any piece of advice that you just want to leave anyone with, and then we'll close it out.
Let's let Kayla go because Ace and I have been doing a lot too much talking, I think.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate this conversation so much. All of the panelists, and you had amazing questions, and just everyone who is here in the audience. And I think like my final thought is that it is so clear that young people aren't just like the future of civic engagement. I think there's a lot of language in that way of young people being like the future, but young people, so many young people are leading civic engagement and advocacy initiatives right now in so many different ways. And so I think a lot of people who are older should, look into that more and highlight and celebrate and encourage the young people that are already doing the work now. I think is super important. Um, and so the young people can get inspired by that. And um, I really like the discussion on service learning. I think it really has the potential to kind of bridge that gap between like the education, the learning, and then the action, and then giving the opportunity to young people to get out there and do things that are important to them. But we have to be committed to youth leadership and to developing young people and their ideas, and also being authentic and making sure that we are kind of leading with our values and leading with our mission. I think is super important. And I just hope that like this discussion encourages all of us to be more intentional about like either how we work with young people or how we show up as young people ourselves. And I think that kind of like what we're doing today, we should just all strive to learn from each other and yeah, and just have, an open mind when we're having conversations with other people. And I just hope that this was as motivating and inspiring to everyone else as it was for me. And I just thank everyone for being a part of the conversation.
I couldn't agree more, Kayla, and I think our work is more important than ever. So I know I've been sounding a little bit doomsday on some of this, but I'm also trying to be a realist, and I'm also passionate that we have to stay strong. We have to continue this work. As Amy said in the chat, these young people are our leaders today and tomorrow. And we have and we're I'm a and they have a lot of impact. No matter what happens at the federal or state level, local levels are powerful too. And you can meet real needs in our local communities by energizing these young people who live in them every day, right? And their families do. So, in a lot of ways, they have a bigger impact than anything that happens in Washington or at the state level. So, be strong. I think there's going to be a lot more need in the coming years, and we need our young people's voice and empowerment to do that work. But, so it's not getting any easier, but it's more important than ever. So I'm glad that we can be part of that too. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Anaya and Kayla. It's always a deep pleasure and I feel like an emotional coming home experience to do any sort of partnership with NYLC. And so thank you so much, Amy, and your whole team for your leadership in the broader space. I want to just say happy Civic Learning Week, everybody. So so I'm gonna put into the chat for a toolkit, a one pager that includes different resources that I share with our partners. And it's not too late. It's not too late to affirm a teacher today and this week for what they do, and whether that's a teacher or a Girl Scout troop leader or whoever that might be. It's not too late to think. it's not too late to go local and announce that on your social media in the spirit of digital citizenship, plan a service project and a service learning initiative and announce it this week at Civic Learning Week and impacting that local experience of your peers and of your community members. It's not too late. It's not too late to share that aspiration of who we are in a culture that's everybody's trying to malign each other and dictate what it is and who this is, and just try to kind of build in these sort of culture wars. It's not too late to show your aspirations and your accomplishments over the course of the last year in defining who we are as a field. And so, I mentioned, Claudette Colvin and and others who've made that sort of those incredible contributions. Adonai mentioned the student nonviolent coordinating community and the many experiences of how young people drove important changes in our history, how the young people have made that experience of all Americans better as a result of their contributions. So it's not too late for that, and it's important to engage in it. I'll also highlight that I don't have an intention. Who knows? Modern medicine may be getting better and better, but I don't have an intention right now, an expectation that I'll be around for the 300th anniversary. Next year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. But I want you all to think about what would we want to celebrate at that 300th, and then what are the actions that we take to pave the way for that celebration, um, because that celebration, if and when it happens, will be dictated by our thoughts, our ideas, and our actions today. So engage and find ways to continue to make your service learning powerful and bring more people in. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today and for teaching us about everything in terms of policy, in terms of youth leadership, in terms of digital civic engagement. You guys have taught us so much. And I just want to say, audience members, thank you so much for joining. You coming here and sitting and learning from these amazing panelists and deciding to gain information about how you can go help youth create their own civic learning projects means so much to us as youth civic leaders and civic leaders in general. So thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Civic Learning Week.